All right, let's talk about a real David versus Goliath story happening in tech right now. We're talking about a small startup out of Paris that's decided to take on the undisputed king of AI. So you got to ask yourself, what if the biggest threat to a giant like OpenAI isn't another huge company from Silicon Valley? What if it's a small, scrappy team in Paris? Because, there's a huge shift happening in the AI arms race. For what feels like forever, Silicon Valley has called all the shots. But now, a European challenger is on the scene, and they are playing by a totally different set of rules. So back in May 2023, this new company, Mistral AI, pops up in France. And I mean, in no time at all, they made it crystal clear to the entire world that they were serious, like really serious. And look, this wasn't just some random startup. We're talking about founders who are legit AI veterans from the biggest labs on the planet, Google's DeepMind and Meta. And they had a very specific plan. They weren't just trying to build another company. They wanted to build a true European AI champion. And their whole philosophy, it's all about being open and transparent. And boy, did investors take notice. Their valuation shot up to an incredible $6 billion in under 2 years. That's just wild. Okay, so to really get how massive of a challenge this is, we've got to talk about the big boss, the reigning giant, OpenAI. And let's be real here. For most of us, when we think of AI, we think of OpenAI, right? ChatGPT was a total game changer, a global phenomenon. It handles a mind-boggling number of requests. We're talking over 2.5 billion every single day. You just can't beat that kind of brand recognition. So their whole strategy, their whole empire, is built on these super powerful but totally closed-off models. We call them black boxes for a reason. Yeah, you can use the tool, but you have no idea what's going on inside. You can't tweak it, you can't modify it, and you definitely can't run it on your own servers. It's basically a trust us, it works kind of deal, with no way to really verify. So the big question is, how on earth does a startup compete with that? Well, Mistral's playbook is the complete opposite. And this is where things get super interesting. This right here shows you two totally different paths for the future of AI. You've got OpenAI with its closed-off, premium, kind of one-size-fits-all model. And then you have Mistral, and they are betting the farm on open source, on transparency, on letting you customize things. They actually give businesses the model's core programming, the weights, which means you can run it on your own machines. For things like data privacy and just having control, that's a huge, huge deal. Plus, it's usually way more cost-effective. So what's their secret sauce? Well, it's this really clever tech called mixture of experts. Think of it like this. Instead of one giant know-it-all brain trying to answer every single question, you have a whole team of specialists. So when a task comes in, the system is smart enough to send it to the right expert for the job. And the genius of this is that they don't have to fire up the entire massive network for every little thing. That makes their models way faster and a whole lot cheaper to run, all without really losing any of the quality. And this quote from Mistral CEO Arthur Minch just nails it. He says the ability to deploy locally, that's the whole game. Control is the product they're selling. And for big companies, especially over in Europe, the idea of controlling their own data, running AI on their own private servers, and not being totally locked into one American tech giant, well, that's not just a feature, it's a massive, massive selling point. Okay, so this isn't just about two companies duking it out. This is actually part of a much bigger geopolitical strategy. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture here. You're going to hear this term a lot, AI sovereignty, and it's a really big deal. It's pretty much the driving force behind Europe's entire game plan for AI. The thinking is, hey, we need to have control over our own digital stuff, our own data. They want to build their own top-tier AI ecosystem that's built on European values. And this is key. Make sure the EU doesn't just become a digital colony that's totally dependent on tech from the US or China. And to make that happen, they're not just hoping for the best. The EU has been methodically putting together this massive legal framework. It's called the EU AI Act, and it's officially kicking into gear this year. The whole point is to create an AI market that's all about excellence and trust. Basically, they want to set the global gold standard for how to regulate AI, and in doing so, give a huge leg up to companies like Mistral that are designed from day one to play by these rules. But, it's not that simple. This regulation is kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's all about protecting European values. But on the other, you've got critics and developers saying, whoa, hold on, these rules are kind of vague. They're worried that the huge cost to comply with everything could actually crush the very startups it's supposed to help, and maybe even give an edge to the giant American companies that have armies of lawyers. So, at the end of the day, this isn't just about cool philosophies or government rules. It all comes down to a massive fight for the multi-billion-dollar enterprise market. And that battle, it is getting very, very hot right now. Now, this chart tells a really interesting story. Look, OpenAI is still the king with everyday consumers, no doubt. But in the super lucrative enterprise market, where the big money is, their market share is actually going down. You see competitors like Anthropic surging because they're laser focused on what businesses really care about, like reliability and safety. This just goes to show there is a massive opening for a company like Mistral that's built from the ground up for what businesses need. And that brings us to this absolutely massive number, 1.3 billion euros. And get this, that's a strategic investment from the semiconductor giant ASML, just one of the most important and influential tech companies on the entire planet. And they just put all that cash into Mistral AI. Yeah, that investment is part of an even bigger, nearly $2 billion funding round. That is the largest round ever for a European AI company. What this tells you is that the serious, heavy-hitting industrial players are placing their bets. They're saying that Mistral's open, efficient, and sovereignty-friendly way of doing things, that's not just some cute little niche. That's the future for business and industry. So what does this all mean? Well, the rise of Mistral AI is a pretty clear sign that the AI race is way more complex and global than maybe we first thought. It's a huge shift away from this idea that there would be one model to rule them all. Instead, it looks like we might be heading into an era with lots of different, specialized champions, where things like openness and control are just as important as sheer power. One thing's for sure, this underdog from Paris has made the race for the future of AI a whole lot more exciting.